Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to OpEd.tv. If there is one thing that is virtually certain every 4 years, it's that the Democratic presidential candidate will spend an awful lot of time, energy, and money trying to win the support of the so-called white swing voters. The very name is telling, swing voters. It's as if by definition, they are the voters who count the most. My guest, the author Steve Phillips, says that quadrennial effort is nonsense, a waste of time and resources. America has changed, he says, and there's a whole different population that Democrats need to focus on. And he has elaborated on this in his new book, Brown is the New White: How the Demographic Revolution Has Created a New American Majority. Steve, welcome. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you coming in. So talk about this new majority. Who makes up this new American majority?
So it's progressive whites and progressive people of color. In that, if you look at the history of the country's demographic composition has changed. And so that's what's made so much more possible. Is people of color used to be 12% of the population in the 1960s, now 38% today.
Meaning African American? No, people of color.
People of color.
So you're saying they were mostly African Americans back at that time?
Well, just of people, of African American, yeah, so it's mainly African Americans. And after the Immigration and Naturalization Act passed in '65, then you had large numbers of Latinos and large numbers of Asians coming into the country. So all those groupings together, along with Arab Americans and Native Americans, that comprises, if you take the progressive sector of that, it's about 23% of the entire US population. And then you have progressive whites, who are often discounted, and I call them sometimes the Rodney Dangerfield of politics. They just don't get it. Everyone's so focused on the white working class and the conservative white working class. What about the progressive whites? So roughly 40% of whites vote progressive every year, every presidential election. And so that's 28% of the U.S. population. So those two sectors is 51% of the U.S. population. That's the new American majority. That's what elected and reelected Obama.
So you mentioned the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1965. Now that was one of two seminal pieces of legislation that year. The other was the Voting Rights Act.
Right.
The Voting Rights Act gets tons of attention, plenty of attention there. But not immigration and naturalization, but it's had a pretty profound effect. So talk about that a little bit.
No, it's been transformative. And I actually didn't know a lot about it prior to doing the research around the book, is that after LBJ gave his speech introducing the Voting Rights Act, after the Bloody Sunday, where he says we shall overcome, the next day he convened his top leadership together and says, I want to do a whole bunch of things. And one of those was to do immigration reform. And so what that did is it, in essence, took down the whites-only sign of immigration in the U.S. From 1790 up until the mid-20th century, the official policy for U.S. was you had to be a free white person to become a U.S. citizen. And so when that barrier was removed, then the country's composition could look more like the rest of the world, which made much more possible politically.
So your contention is that there is this progressive majority in the United States right now. I'm sure there would be a lot of people who are resistant to that. And in fact, the conventional view is that this is a center-right country. So talk about this majority.
Right. So my central analysis is that the election of Obama, and more importantly, the re-election of Obama, marked the tipping point in terms of U.S. politics and its electoral composition. In that, for the first time, obviously, you had African American elected, but even more important was his re-election, where he lost 5 million white votes from '08 to '12, but still was able to get re-elected. And so that showed that a large mobilization of people of color, and you get 80% of their votes, and then you get 39% of the white voting population. That's a winning formula. And the lesson the past 8 years is that when we've had large mobilization, turn people out in '08 and '12, we've won. And when turnout has dropped in '10 and '14, we've lost. So the majority is there if we'll invest in it and bring it out and inspire it.
All right, so you mentioned the white voters. There's an awful lot of people in this country who think that Obama won the white vote in both of his election victories. That's not the case, right?
No Democrat has won the white vote since LBJ in '64. So Carter was the highest. He got 48% in '76. So Obama got 43% in '08 and then 39% in 2012. And so that is the a big myth within national politics.
If you look at 2008, so that's when Sarah Palin was on the ticket with John McCain, it means the majority of white voters in that presidential election would rather have had Sarah Palin in the White House as vice president than Barack Obama there as president. That seems peculiar to me.
Well, it is what it is. I mean, this is a country which has a long and tortured history around race issues, and it's a country which has celebrated and elevated white. I mean, how is it possible that we have 95% of the lead actors in Hollywood and TV shows are white? 95%. That's not, I mean, there's so much bad TV out there. That's not just a talent issue, right? So there's a clear preference and deference to whites as being more intelligent, more prepared, more capable as leaders. So I think, though, that to focus too much on the fact that the majority of them do that does a disservice to appreciating there's a meaningful minority who doesn't go in that direction.
We actually see that meaningful minority that you're talking about. Well, we saw it, as you pointed out, in the Obama campaigns.
Right.
We're seeing it now, especially it's clear in the Bernie Sanders campaign, but also in Hillary
Right.
Clinton's campaign as well.
Right.
All right. So Obama wins election and re-election, and then so that's 2008, 2012. But in the off-year elections,
Right.
2010 and 14, the Democrats just got crushed.
Right.
Is this all the fact that this majority, this progressive majority you're talking about, didn't go to the polls?
It is, but that's an important lesson to draw, is that many people in national politics did not actually draw that conclusion. And even people at the top level of national politics, even in David Axelrod's book, Chuck Schumer's made different comments, having the view that the reason the Democrats lost is because the voters turned their allegiance from Democrats to Republicans and swung against them. And then therefore that argument can be used to say that the Democrats need to become more conservative. Or in actual fact, it's the exact opposite. People were uninspired. Turnout for the Republicans dropped 7 million votes from 08 to 10. Turnout for the Democrats dropped 26 million votes. People did not come out, they were not inspired, they're not spoken to, they were not targeted, and we paid the price.
So that difference in the extent to which the vote was diminished in the two parties is what made up the difference, and it was a huge difference.
Right.
In the off-year elections.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's an important lesson to understand because it has implications for what do you do going forward. And so too many people in the Democratic Party feel that the lesson was that we were not conservative enough and that we have to be more moderate to attract those voters. Whereas in fact, it's the exact opposite. We need to inspire people, give them a reason to come out. So those folks who came out in the presidential years will come out in the midterm elections. That's the challenge before us.
All right, we anoint you the top Democratic advisor in this country. Okay. Now you're looking at the party as a whole, the presidential elections, but also the party as a whole. You want to win back control of both houses of Congress. You say the Democrats have made a mistake in chasing the so-called, maybe even mythical, white swing voters.
Right.
But if and you say you have to give your own natural constituency more of a reason to turn out.
Right.
How do you begin to do this? How do you begin to make that shift?
So there's, I think, 2 or 3 parts to it. So one is the issue set, in that you have to lift up issues and inspire people and give them a reason to turn out. Democrats ran away from universal health care. They ran away from immigration reform, and because they feared that those issues would alienate the white swing voter. And so then those who had family members who were impacted by not having health care and family members who were impacted by not being secure as immigrants to the country, they saw no reason to turn out. The other is how you spend your money. The Democrats are wasting hundreds of millions of dollars on 30-second TV ads that are targeting this shrinking sector of the population, rather than investing in what's been tried and true, is organizing human beings who are neighbors and friends and relatives to go door to door and do phone calls. The progressives spent $19 million in North Carolina on negative television ads in 2014 in that Senate race. That same $19 million could have paid for 400 full-time staff people for an entire year going door to door, making calls. If each of those people had just gotten 3 additional people per week, they would have won that race.
And is there more that can be done in terms of just turnout itself, separate and apart from policy or the way you gear your campaign? And I'm talking about efforts to get more people registered, more of an effort to get people to the polls, and some kind of a massive educational effort to show people how important it is to vote in off-year elections and in state and local elections.
Right. Yeah, so there's so much that we could do. Actually, I was at a gathering with the president recently. He was saying we're the only Western country which discourages people from voting. And so there's a lot that could be done if we wanted people to vote. So Oregon and California have instituted automatic registration. So if you're in the DMV records and you're eligible, you're put on automatically. You have to actively unregister to vote. And so that's a significant piece. California, we passed online voter registration. When we passed that, 800,000 people registered to vote within 6 weeks. So those are types of efforts. I was down in San Diego recently. In San Diego, and the government of Mexico, by law, has to run public service announcements in San Diego targeting Mexican citizens about the upcoming Mexican election this summer. San Diego doesn't run PSAs for its own elections. And so there's a lot that we could be doing that would popularize elections more, engaging artists and engaging athletes to get it more in the popular culture that we need to actually be voting. So
I think some of the strongest evidence that your theory is correct is the extent to which Republicans and conservatives are doing everything they can to suppress the vote of this very population that you're talking about. So what about the fight against that voter suppression? Is enough being done there?
So, yeah, there's a lot of good activism going on and good activists. And I talk in the book about the Republicans have this dual approach of suppression and seduction. And so they elevate different candidates of color to try to confuse people. And there's a very aggressive suppression effort. I mean, in 2010, when they got the governorships in Wisconsin and Ohio and these different states, right away they took away the early voting measures. They instituted the voter ID laws. So there is work being happening on that front. I do think we also need to think more creatively around trying to leapfrog some of those efforts. And so I had a friend who was active working with SEIU in Pennsylvania around challenging the voter ID laws there successfully. But she was saying, well, maybe instead of putting all that time, energy, and money into fighting those efforts in the court, maybe we should be getting people IDs. And so they're thinking that kind of a ground. And then also looking, can we enlist the technology entities, right? You can go to any Macy's in the country. They're reasonably sure you are who you are when you present your credit card, right? So why can't we use that technology to enable people to turn out to vote and have the technology companies validate that we are actually able to do this much more efficiently?
Now, in order to get that done, though, you'd have to have an awful lot of, you'd have to have a large coordinated effort to make it easier to vote and to fight against voter suppression on the one hand and to make it easier to vote on the other. Who should lead that effort? Because I don't really see an effort of the kind of scale that I'm thinking about underway.
Right. Well, this is something that I'm actually hopeful that the president will make a signature effort of his post-president, well, hopefully even this year, in his last several months, but that he doesn't yet have a defining issue for what will be his legacy and his work after the presidency. And he has the platform, he has the brand, and his family is very respected in this regard. So they could do a significant amount in that regard, and they are looking at some of this from what I hear.
Right. So we've been talking mostly about politics, but what about policy? So you had mentioned a preference in this, a historical preference in this country for pretty much all things white, and I very much tend to agree with you on that. And I think that has a huge effect not just on politics, but on policy as well. Can you talk a little bit about the impact of this sort of white-oriented view of life in the United States on public policy in the United States?
Right. Yeah. No, I have a chapter I call "Blinded by the White" in the book that really looks at this historical, frankly, obsession and in a failure to understand and appreciate the conditions and the realities of the other communities. And having done the research around the book and had a chance to think about why things are the way they are, I've actually come to the conclusion that one of the most important questions that address in this country is, why is there a racial wealth gap? Why does the average white family have $140,000 in assets and the average black family has $10,000 in assets? And that's either because black folks are less talented or less able, or something more macro and systemic and structural is going on. So when you start to dig into that, look at the role of the GI Bill and the federal housing policies in the 20th century that essentially gave billions of dollars to whites and excluded people of color and African Americans in particular from that. That has profound public policy implications then. So reparations is not just a handout to somebody who's not working hard. It's actually addressing the country's both historic debt, but the contemporary conditions. And so when you only have $10,000 in assets, your ability to access education, your ability to access a range of opportunities is much more limited. And so that, I think, is a profound question that we have to deal with much more aggressively.
So President Obama, when he takes office in 2009, in January 2009, is immediately confronted by this, and there are few people in this country who are more aware of the dynamic than he was and still is. How would you characterize the way he has coped with and reacted to this whole issue of, you have to be concerned at almost all times with what the white population in this country is going to think about almost any policy initiative?
There are aspects and times I think we've been somewhat disappointed around, and I quote one of his advisors. This is that anytime anything controversial was proposed, that the concern was, well, how's this going to affect the swing vote, or how's that going to affect the battleground states? And so it made people more, and certainly in the administration, I think, more timid than they could or should have been. I mean, the effort to spend all this time trying to get Republican support for health care reform, which we didn't get any. And so we could have moved that much more quickly.
And the Republicans had made it clear that they weren't going to support health care reform or almost any other Obama initiative.
Exactly. So a more aggressive approach would have been to realize you have this majority, both within the country and within the Congress, and to roll through a whole series of policy measures. We could have moved immigration reform in 2009 and a whole other set of measures as well.
Given that, I'd like to know what your view is about how successful the Obama presidency has been overall. He's coming towards the end of his second term. And how you think history is going to view his presidency. They may not be one and the same.
I do think that he's going to be seen very positively historically. And there's a lot, and even just look at the charts that show the job growth from when he came in 2009 to where it is now, and X number of months of consecutive job growth. He did save the country from depression, and no one gets him real credit for that. And it's the first time in history we've had universal health care reform, and then a lot of environmental policies, the Paris Accords, et cetera. So I think history will look at him very positively in that regard.
No new wars.
No new wars. And also, just in terms of the example that they set, to say nothing of no scandal attached to the administration. But just, I don't think we're going to know for probably another decade the cultural and sociological significance of having all of these young people grow up with this first family for 8 years. I think it's going to be profound in terms of the sense of expectations and what's possible and what this country really is and is all about. So overall, I think it's all been very positive. I do think that there could have been a more aggressive approach, and I think there was too much effort to try to win over Republicans and try to reason with them, people who had no interest in being reasoned with. And I do think we lost some time on some issues on that front. But overall, I think it's been very positive and successful, if not actually historic.
So we have a presidential election underway right now. To my mind, a bizarre presidential election, but nevertheless, there it is. The Republicans are essentially, at least in terms of the presidential election, essentially an all-white party. I mean, there's very few non-white votes accruing to that side. The Democrats have the split going on between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. Applying your thesis about the importance of this progressive vote progressive majority, in your view, in this country. Start with the Democrats. How should the Democrats be approaching this election, and are they doing it in the correct way, or are they making the same old mistakes?
Well, we'll see. So I think some of the initial steps that Hillary took originally were very positive in terms of she was actually criticized by the New York Times for being her risky leftward lurch, but it was clearly that she was trying to appeal to this new American majority and actually go the different direction her husband had gone with the triangulation and moving to the middle.
I love it when Hillary Clinton is considered a leftist, but anyway.
Well, in 2015 she was, right? So 2016 is back to the centrist mindset. And clearly, she would not be where she is, and the presumptive nominee if we're not for the African American vote.
Yeah, right.
And so I think she knows that, and I think their campaign knows that. So now the question what happens in the next few weeks and months will be very determinative. One of the things I keep wondering is, are we going to desegregate the office of the vice presidency? We've never had a vice president of color. That's strictly a political calculation around what you think the electorate will tolerate, and we are going to have, this is the first post-Obama election. And so is this ticket going to inspire and speak to this multiracial, younger grouping of people?
A lot of I don't know if it's the conventional wisdom, but a lot of the pundits are saying that Hillary needs to select a white man as vice president, preferably from one of the big Midwestern industrial states, or maybe a state like Florida, where perhaps it can help with the electoral vote.
Right.
You disagree with that?
Oh, I disagree. I couldn't disagree with that more strongly. that would be the old and failed approach in terms of how to actually go about. The way to win is to excite and inspire and mobilize voters of color and younger voters. And that's not going to happen with the traditional, bland white male candidate that they have put up historically, that traditional approach.
So this new majority, which has elected Obama twice, it's confronting the Republicans as well. How should the Republicans be responding to this new reality?
Yeah, well, it's fascinating to watch, but also on some levels it's actually not that complicated. So I actually believe that this is the last best hope to hold back the demographic tidal wave and the demographic revolution. And I think the intensity of the feeling behind Trump is because people feel that intuitively. And
they're aware of it at some level.
Yes, that this is that the country is going to change, going to change forever in ways that they're not comfortable with.
Right.
And Trump is stirring that up, with his great showman skills. And that grouping of people has never had a champion like Trump before. So it's kind of upended all the traditional calculations. But many of the Republicans actually understood these issues better than many of the Democrats did. Right? I talk in my final chapter about conservatives can count. And so they had their whole autopsy that talked about the importance of reaching out to, bringing in, connecting with voters of color. Marco Rubio poses in an open convention, a very dangerous threat, because he can articulate the immigrant experience in a way that resonates with a lot of different people of color in ways better than many Democrats actually do. So, but they have this, their challenge is Trump's not playing the same game. And so they're trying to figure out how do you win the general election. Trump just wants to be a bigger deal and more popular.
Right. We've run out of time, much to my chagrin. Steve Phillips, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, and I enjoyed it.
Okay, we'll be back in a moment with a final word. 3 years ago, the state-run school commission in Philadelphia decided, despite furious community protests, to close 23 public schools, nearly 10% of all the schools in the city. The kids will go to better schools, the parents were told. We'll save money, the commissioners said. A remarkable article by Rachel Cohen in the American Prospect magazine noted that one of the schools closed was the Edward Bach Technical High School, a venerable 8-story building in South Philadelphia. The building was assessed at nearly $18 million, but it was sold by the city to the daughter of a local developer for just $2 million. This mass closing of public schools is hardly limited to Philadelphia. It has hit cities across the country, Oakland, Detroit, and Newark among them. And inevitably, they are the schools with heavy Black or Latino enrollment. Chicago made the decision in 2013 to close nearly 50 public schools, the largest mass school closing in U.S. history. In case there is any question about which of the city's students were targeted, consider. Black students were roughly 40% of Chicago's public school population, but they were nearly 90% of the youngsters affected by the school closings. As for that 8-story school building in Philadelphia that was assessed at $18 million and sold off for $2 million, it's now got an upscale restaurant on the top floor that serves French cuisine, craft beers, and fine wines. As Cohen noted, young millennials have dubbed it Philly's hottest new rooftop bar. Longtime residents call it a sick joke. That's all for now. See you next time.